Hello and welcome to CIO Leadership Live. I'm your host, Kathy O'Sullivan, editor for CIO New Zealand. My guest today is Ian Boyd, head of ICT at ANZCO Foods. Hello, Ian.
Hi, Kathy. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today. Can you tell us a little bit more about your role and what you and your team at ANZCO Foods do?
Sure. So I'll just start with ANZCO Foods because some of your viewers might not have heard of us before. So ANZCO is New Zealand's fifth largest exporter, and our mission is to bring good health and nutrition to the world through New Zealand's finest beef and lamb products. So we export to 84 countries, and I'm lucky enough to live in the beautiful Christchurch, and I run the technology team for ANZCO. So my team are responsible for everything from day-to-day service desk and infrastructure support through to innovation and development. So custom development of applications and drones and Internet of Things technology. Our enterprise reporting, and then more recently plant automation. So looking at how can we be smarter in our plants to help assist the people with their work.
So a lot going on there, and transformation is obviously a huge part of that. And we often talk about transformation as if it's a given within organizations, but you'll know that it's not something easy to do. So can you talk us through how that approach has taken shape in your own career?
Yeah, sure. So I think the important thing there with change or transformation is that people quite often kick into it without thinking about setting the context or, talking to the organisation about what that change actually means. And throughout my career, I've found one of the really important parts is explaining to people what's in it for them to make the change. And I think that dealing with that fear of the unknown up front can be crucial. And if you look at a sort of adoption bell curve, getting those, early movers or, gaining support for that change early makes the whole process a lot smoother for everyone.
So then walking back from the end product of transformation, when it's all done, what do you think are some key steps that CIOs must take along the way? Is there ever a starting point to kick off a transformation journey?
Yeah, I think, there's several change models out there, but two that I really like are Lewin's model and Kotter's model. And in Lewin's model, they talk about unfreezing the organisation before you start on change. In Kotter's model, they talk about building that vision for change. And I think, again, it's really important when you're starting out to work through with people. Because people, if we take a system implementation as an example, people understand the current system, they know its limitations and challenges, and they've been able to, pull their workarounds together, or they know what they're dealing with. So it's really important if you're replacing that system with something else that they understand. It might not all be smooth, but that they will be supported, and that, the fear of change is not required, that change will be good.
And fear is often a roadblock. It often is something that people in organizations have to overcome along the way. Are there any other common roadblocks that you think are common challenges to avoid along the way?
Yeah, I think it's really important to have a great executive sponsor for a project. I've seen a number of projects where the executive sponsor either hasn't been committed to the change itself, or even sometimes organisations starting out not really understanding who that executive sponsor is. And I think it's easy to get into change for change's sake, especially when we look at, disruption of industry or new players coming along. And there's always the keep up with the Joneses effect. So I think if change isn't aligned to strategy and the mission of the business, and there's not a good executive sponsor to make sure that it's holding the project to account for delivering on that change in strategy, then you may be starting out with half the team you need.
Yeah, absolutely. That buy-in is so important, isn't it? And do you think, is there an end date to transformation? Should it be viewed as a project with a deadline, or do you think transformation should be seen as an ongoing development within a business?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kathy. I think, COVID's really shone a light on that as well. There's the old meme that goes around that says COVID was the number one enabler for digital transformation. But I think, that speed of change that we've had for a lot of companies in the last 24 months has meant people have had to deal with a lot of change. And we've kind of hit a velocity of work that is going to mean that people need to think about sustainability of their teams in terms of not just the amount of change that we're requesting people go through, but also making sure that we're not burning people out. So I view transformation as maybe a program of projects, but I think a lot of companies at the moment are grappling with how do we keep that transformation sustainable, because you do have to give people a chance to step back and take a breath every now and again to go again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of organizations are keeping an eye on that and on their teams burning out. So then, as head of ICT, can you tell us how are you collaborating and influencing the organization and its leadership team?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is actually the most important part of being, the senior IT person of an organisation is collaborating with the rest of the executive team, and really at ANZCO, IT is a support function of the business. So often my work is actually making sure that I understand the rest of the executive team's goals. And we're actually putting strategy and plans in place to try and help them be successful in their strategy or goals. So I think alignment back to the business is really important.
So what do you think then are some of the key attributes of a modern day CIO in relation to leadership?
Yeah, so I think, communication is really important, the ability to be able to deal with lots of different people and people at different levels of the organisation as well. I think empathy is always good. Being able to put yourself in the shoes of your end users or your customers, and be able to see things from their perspective as well. And I think, more and more the role of the CIO is to build a culture of innovation within a business. To make sure that we're telling the story of why we're doing what we're doing, not just working out the technical nuts and bolts of how that comes together.
And you've touched on it there with culture and the innovation culture at ANZCO. So how are you creating that internal culture that helps people thrive at work?
Yeah. So I'm very lucky. I have a fantastic team around me, which really helps. And I'm quite protective of that team in that we make sure when we have new people coming on that there's fit and that, they share our same values base. And I hire for attitude and ability, not necessarily for skill. because I think you can always teach someone skills, but it's very hard to teach people how to have the right attitude or approach to things. And I try and look after myself. So I do my own professional and personal development, and I hope that shows my team that it's important for them to do it as well. And we talk a lot as a team about the concept of a cup, and you have things that deplete from your cup, or they take energy out of your cup. And it's really important to focus as well on what are you doing to make sure that you're adding something back to the cup.
Great to hear, and leading from the top, walking the walk as it is. So you spoke about hiring there, and we don't have enough diversity in IT roles here in New Zealand. Why do you think that is, and what do you think are some practical things that can be done to attract more diverse candidates to IT roles?
Yeah, it's a really important question, Kathy, and unfortunately, I think IT as an industry hasn't scored well in diversity and inclusion. And the fact of the matter is we've lost engagement with a lot of young females. They don't view IT as a career, and they view it as a male-dominated industry. So from that perspective, I think we need to do more as an industry to help encourage young women into thinking about IT as a career, and then helping and supporting them as they enter the workforce. There's lots of science out there now around, if you put requirements on a job description, if a male meets 30% of those requirements, they'll apply for the job. For a woman, if they don't meet 100% of those requirements, they won't apply for the job. And in the modern world, we've almost made that worse with the fact that a lot of companies are screening applications through some sort of algorithm or tool, which is then taking some of those out of the mix as well. And I think in New Zealand, we do suffer from unconscious bias, not just with women, but also with different cultures as well. And I've seen examples of some really great and smart people who unfortunately would find it much easier to find a job if their name was different, as an example. And I think that's really sad.
So are there any practical things you think can be done to lessen that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're doing a lot of work at ANZCO at the moment on our recruitment, and even simple things like making sure that the wording of job adverts is appealing to women, because we want to promote, more applications from women to our roles, and making sure that those adverts aren't turning women away, I think is really good. And we're working towards, trying to take that unconscious bias out of the mix. So looking at things like, can you take names off CVs so that you are looking at someone on their merits and there's no ability for that unconscious bias to come out.
Great to hear. Very, very, very practical things there. So looking back on your own career then, are there any mistakes that have shaped you as a leader?
There's probably lots of mistakes. I don't know that I'd like to talk about them in detail, but I think I've had instances in my past where I've maybe seen something was not quite right within the organisation, and I've tried to influence that without the mandate to do so. And I think, that acting with mandate has been something that has come to me later in my career, really making sure that, you have the organisation and the executive giving you that mandate to do what you're trying to do is important. And I think, New Zealand businesses aren't great at actually teaching people how to go from being a team leader to a manager. We end up a lot of the time with someone who's been promoted because they're really great at doing their job. But we don't necessarily train them in how do you help other people be great at their job. So I think we have a lot of really great, skilled and talented people who struggle with that transition where they go from being the person that does the work to managing the people that do the work.
So what's some of the best career advice you've ever received?
I think having a great boss is really important. Having someone that will give you the opportunities and sort of actively be your cheerleader is really important. And I've had, instances in my career where, I've had great examples of good leaders that I can copy, and I've had some not so great examples which have been really good as well.
Yeah, sometimes you learn from bad managers as well what not to do, right?
Absolutely.
So what advice would you give to someone who was aspiring to be a CIO or a senior leader in technology?
Yep, great question. So my advice to them would be make sure you really understand the business that you're trying to help. Make sure that you understand how the organisation works and what the levers are that you can pull to help increase the performance of the organisation or help them out financially. Because I think being able to have the conversation with the organisation in context and not just be the technical speeds and feeds person is really important. And I think one of the other things I've learned is never be afraid to ask the seemingly dumb question. Because often if you're thinking you have the dumb question, there are other people in the room that are also thinking that. And, we're an industry that is horrible for 3-letter acronyms and jargon that gets thrown around. So I think being prepared to or brave enough to ask those dumb questions is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So many acronyms. So can you tell us then what's important to you in the months ahead? What's on your priority list?
Yep. So first of all, my team. So making sure that they're empowered and happy and fulfilled in what they're doing. We've had a couple of very busy years. And it looks like this year's not going to be any different. So I've got a lot of people who are, had the Christmas break, have come back recharged and energised, and are now, as we go into what would traditionally be our quiet time of year, looking forward to, taking their mid-year breaks to be with family and friends. And because of COVID and the climate that we've had recently, it looks like our slow part of the year might not be that slow. So we're going to, as a team, have to work through what that means. And I think probably cybersecurity. So one of the big parts of my job is obviously making sure the organisation doesn't get hacked. With the world political environment at the moment, there's a lot of stuff happening in the cybersecurity space, and we're trying to keep abreast of all of the latest developments and make sure that we're managing that risk well for the organisation.
A busy few months ahead. Ian Boyd, Head of ICT at ANZCO Foods, thank you so much for your time today.